Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. A lot has been mentioned about the Western information warfare in Ukraine. I'd like to ask a reverse question to my guest here, Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan. Sir, it's something that I wanted to ask. Have the Russians actually won the narrative war? And that's something that has been, tinkering me for a little bit, because today the narrative war is all about what happens on Twitter or on Telegram or on Instagram. But there's a lot more than that, isn't it?
Good evening, Aadi. Nice to be on the show again with you. We've had some very interesting conversations in the past. And over the last couple of weeks, at least, we've discussed more about Russian and the Ukraine campaign. Well, after the fall of Mariupol in, on the 22nd of May, there's been a little change in the Western narrative. The larger media houses known for otherwise their independence have stopped talking about the Russians losing the war. They speak about the time that it's taken the Russians to reach where they've had to. They started talking about the casualties the Russians may have taken. But slowly, they are moving away from this narrative of the Russians losing the war. So let's just start from the beginning. That when Putin decided to launch his Ukraine campaign, what was the narrative? It started the Americans probably talking by the first week of January that Putin is going to launch a war against Ukraine, and that there is this evil bear, the evil empire, deciding to destroy poor, innocent Ukraine. That was the narrative. Slowly, the Russian forces had built up. It actually built up a year before. There was a fair amount of almost 150,000 people, soldiers in Belarus, in the north, directly east of Kiev. And they'd also built up in the south and along the Crimean Peninsula and the other places. Then when Putin actually started the war, they started talking about the ghost of Kiev. So remember the pilot who destroyed a whole lot of, supposed to have destroyed at that time 30, 40 Russian aircraft. But the Russians continued their campaign. They continued focusing on the south, linking the Luhansk, Donetsk, linking the Sea of Mariupol, slowly closing the Sea of Azov, and of course also connected with Mariupol, which seems to be their main target. Why? Because if you see the map of Mariupol, it's actually on the Sea of Azov, on the Black Sea itself. It's this huge 20-kilometer by 20-kilometer steel plant. Probably the premier steel plant of Ukraine. It has actually been built up in the Second World War. And it was also a steel plant during that period, during the Russian-German campaign, and also had a series of battles in that time. So when you look at these number of, the importance of Mariupol and the importance of the steel plant, then of course, if you remember, Aadi, about 2 months back, the focus started changing from Kiev, and it started going back to the south because they found that the Russians were actually doing nothing in Kiev. He was supposed to have placed this large 60-kilometer convoy threatening Kiev. He had sent out probing patrols, probably a few advance guards, to see how the Ukrainians would react, but kept them occupied with this large 60-kilometer convoy of the Russian army on the road itself, showing them that this is what he's planning to do. But slowly this convoy started dissipating. the troops started moving away from there. So if you take a look at the war itself, Adi, they started with Kharkiv. They started with the Battle of the East. They started with threatening Kiev from the north and the east. And they also focused on Kharkiv. They focused on the Donbass Peninsula that juts into the Russian campaign. And then Odessa was already, more or less with them. Crimea is more or less with the Russians. They also hit Kherson. And then suddenly the Russian forces swung right from Crimea and west from Donetsk, and went on to surround the Mariupol steel plant. That's the time when the American narrative became a little more chiller. There were more forces being sent into Ukraine. The Americans announced $20 billion support for Ukraine. And, all the European Union nations had started moving in. So this is the buildup of a narrative that they wanted to say, that the Russians were an army that is not capable of fighting. The Russians had planned badly. The Russians had thought that this war would be over in 5 to 10 days, and the brave Ukrainians were fighting it out. But this narrative, now just see how it's moved away, and slowly, suddenly, against the run of play, as they say in cricket or in any other sport, you have the city of Mariupol finally collapsing. Huge number of fighters have surrendered. 2,400 plus fighters of the Azov Battalion have surrendered. So, who's winning? What damage has Ukraine done to Russia? They talked of 300 tanks, 500 tanks, 800 tanks, 200 aircraft. But finally, what is the evidence of any kind of damage of that nature onto Russia? We spoke about the drones, the damage that the drones had done. And we had this conversation about the drones, and they realized that drones had not really done much damage. And of course, now the Russians have unveiled the laser, anti-drone laser. So it's an interesting situation, Aadi. You and me know only what we're reading in the papers, or in the news, or on Twitter, or on anything else. But once a turning event like the fall of Mariupol happens, then the focus rechanges, that maybe the Russians are doing it right, and maybe Ukraine and NATO-supported Ukraine is maybe losing the plot. So it's a difficult situation because no one knows what the truth is. That's the main issue.
The whole game of intelligence is to try and gauge the intent of the other person to be gauged. So that's something, the entire, you can get facts, you can get figures, but the intent is something which is very difficult to find out. Let me ask you this, you mentioned the Battle of Kiev, and it begs the question that the Russians were basically doing a huge mop-up in the southern part of Ukraine. Kherson, they went on to, they're right outside the borders of Mykolaiv, they're right outside the borders of Zaporozhye, which they are now talking about, releasing their passports in. Anyways, different topic. They took Mariupol, they surrounded Mariupol, they took certain regions in the north in terms of the Sumy area and, that entire space, and now they're doing whatever they're doing in that bulge. My question is that the major capture of land actually happened when the 60-kilometer tank convoy was standing in front of Kiev. Now, was that an eye candy that the Russians gave the West, that keep looking at this so that by the time we can finish what's happening in the south?
It was definitely a maneuver meant to deceive the NATO and Ukraine about the actual focus of Putin's battle. He had never said he would capture Kyiv. And if you remember when we had this conversation, and I had clearly said that it is impossible to capture Kyiv so quickly. These are built-up areas. They require to be completely surrounded. They require to be completely cut off. But going inside built-up areas to fight a built-up area battle is an impossibility in the Russian spring or in the Ukraine spring, because the roads, apart from the existing roads, the fields are almost impossible to traverse. But yes, it was a maneuver meant to deceive. It was a deception maneuver. It comes out clearly because he didn't press home anything. He made it so realistic, but he didn't press it home. So his main focus, the main focus of the attack was from the south. His main idea was to, I would say one of his main aims was to take Mariupol. And while taking Mariupol, he took Melitopol, he took Kherson, he took Donbass, Donetsk, and kept Kharkiv busy. So he kept a sizable force of the Ukrainian army to the north, occupied with the Russian invasion on supposed to be Russian invasion in Kyiv, and moved the balance of his forces from the south, and was able to mop up what he said he would. And about 3 weeks ago, Putin said, my aim was to take Donbass, it was to take Lugansk, it was to take Donetsk, and it was to link up the Sea of Azov. So he's reached his aim. He reached the point at which he said he would reach. So I agree. It was a deception maneuver. It was meant to deceive, and it melted away. A 60-kilometer stretch doesn't just melt away unless there was a clear idea that they would not launch.
Let's talk about Azovstal, sir. A lot has been said about that, besieged area. And as a matter of fact, as we speak, there was a report last night that the Russians put out that they captured about 3 or 5 chaps who were trying to hide. Now, the Russians themselves are not very sure that, whether those chaps were trying to hide or just didn't get the message of the surrender, because, the Russians had pretty much isolated certain segments because these forces had gone in the middle of the entire thing. So some of them were even cut off. And they suspect some of these chaps still hiding out, some of the biggest guys, supposedly the nastiest chaps, still hiding out in that place. But probably a rumor, probably a narrative. I'm not sure what it is. Let's talk about Azovstal. So now, with the information that you have and the kind of effort that the Ukrainians put in to save that place, what was there and why? How? What? Now you've kind of hinted about on the narrative that the Russians played to capture this. I won't say a symbolic, but this city, and a lot has been spoken about this on both the sides. What do you think is there, and how was this narrative all built up by the Russians as well, sir?
Firstly, Aadi, let's go to geography first. I love describing what I call strategic geography.
Sir.
Then we'll talk of strategic history. The importance of Mariupol, right? Why the Russians want it is the third issue. And why Ukraine doesn't want to give it to the fourth issue. So what does Mariupol mean? It was iconic. This was an iconic steel plant that had faced a huge battle in 1944. After Kyiv, this was the next large battle that took place in the then USSR before the Germans went forward to Moscow and Stalingrad. Kyiv was also a very important part of USSR at that time. The way Mariupol is on the Sea of Azov, the way it's located, and the importance it has for Ukraine economically and historically is that Mariupol steel plant is one of the largest steel plants in the world. And the Ukraine steel industry entirely ships all its steel directly from the Mariupol port onto the Black Sea and further onto the balance of the country. So strategic geography-wise, he had to take the port of Mariupol and the steel plant. He had to, because he wanted to link Odessa with Donbass. He wanted to cut Ukraine off from their access to the Black Sea. So no longer now can Ukraine carry out any kind of trade shipping from the south. Ukraine will now have to go via Hungary, it will have to go via Poland to do any kind of trade. It can't move its ships from the south, and that's their only access to the sea. So economically, Mariupol, the city of Mariupol is extremely important. Secondly, Mariupol was in the center of what he called this bridge to cut off the Sea of Azov. Extremely important. Thirdly, Azov itself is an iconic name for the Ukrainians and the Russians. This battalion that they have made, who have surrendered, who actually form the nucleus of the Ukrainian armed guard, National Guard, is named the Azov Battalion. It is the nucleus. Why Azov? Because that's how important this name is to both the Ukrainians and the Russians. And that is where the entire Azov Battalion was located, to prevent the Russians from taking over Mariupol, which they actually retook Mariupol from them in 2014.
Okay.
So historically, it's extremely important. Strategic geography-wise, their task would have been incomplete without taking over Mariupol. They had to take it to link Donbass with Crimea. They had to. And they had to take it to deny Ukraine the ability to any access to the sea. Which is why Ukraine threw everything they had into this battle. Right? And the fact that they had nothing more to throw, because the Russians simply cut off Mariupol.
Yeah.
The Russians had decided about a month back that they would not go inside the steel plant. If you saw the photograph of the steel plant, it's 6 stories deeper.
Yeah.
And it is a labyrinth of passages. So I remember reading a Russian report which said we will cut off Mariupol from all sides. And even a bird can't get through. And sometime or the others, the people inside will have to collapse and come out, because we are not going in. We're not losing soldiers. And that's exactly what the Russian army did.
Yeah.
They cut them off, they let them come in. And now I believe, which not come, that there is a fair amount of foreign military advisors that they have also caught, along with the 2,400 personnel of the Azov Battalion, and a huge number of weapons from all over all the countries. So is this the end of Putin's aim? Does this signal that the Russians will now call it a day and call it a ceasefire? Or will the Russians continue? Because when you continue a war, you have 2 issues. What are your political aims, military aims, based on what you wanted politically? And if you've reached the end point of your military aims, then any further movement into this battle will be counterproductive. So that is something that now we are waiting to see a signal from President Putin as to what was his aim, because he clearly said a month back that his aim was to link up Odessa to Donbass and complete and deny Ukraine the access to the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea.
By what you say, sir, that means the Battle of Odessa is yet to come. And we're going to see that in the next couple of days.
In many ways, yes. In many ways, there may not be a battle at all.
Yeah, that's what we see in this region called Zaporozhye, which is a bit north of, Mykolaiv, just a little north of the Crimean Peninsula, Kherson region, where a lot of preparation, if I may, with highlights put it across, that a lot of preparations are being done for the Russian arrival, not the invasion. And this is coming out from the sources of the local government there itself. They've started issuing some passports and started using rubles and a whole lot of stuff. So one wonders how far this fighting, especially in these pockets, will carry on.
I don't know
So,
if you remember our last conversation, I did say that the Russians would look to cut off Ukraine till the Dnieper River.
Dnieper River.
Because east of the Dnieper River were actually the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. And west of the Dnieper River was a part of Poland before Ukraine came into existence.
Poland, Hungary, yeah, a lot of.
So maybe his aim is to cut this off completely and what he would call unify the Russian-speaking Ukrainians into one larger issue.
Possibly, sir. Absolutely.
Because their aim at one point a month ago talked of Mariupol, talked of closing up the Sea of Azov. So I don't expect the same kind of battle to happen in Odessa, frankly.
That's
But you never know, because I am not sure if Ukraine has been able to reinforce Odessa.
Well, their propaganda channels are talking about a huge amount of supplies. They actually lost a huge military cargo plane last week where they were trying to supply it with some heavy weapons and stuff like that. It had some of these howitzers and stuff like that, which was shot down by the Russian air defense and acknowledged by the Ukrainians as well. So, one thing that I've tried to do is anything that I put out, sir, I've tried to see from both the sides.
Cross-reference, yeah.
Because otherwise it's a maze of information that one will get lost into. So till the time it's not kind of put out by the other person, it's not very, very easy to, put your money on it.
So I am not certain, Aadi, having tried my best to read up about the port city of Odessa and see what kind of forces does Ukraine have there. Because, Ukraine had, I would say, half its forces north of Kiev.
Still
that is, and they were protecting Kiev and the areas around Kiev.
Still
where the Russian, So if half their forces were there, they had about, say, 200,000 soldiers totally. If half the forces were there, then the balance half have been consumed in this battle in the east and the south.
And
it would be very difficult for them to have moved a division or two divisions in Odessa to make it into an impregnable fortress. So that's another issue with which I was just wondering as to, it would be a very difficult job to do for the Ukrainians.
There's also another thing which is interesting, sir. President Lukashenko of Belarus is actually, yesterday he put out a statement of forming up a separate southern command which will put pressure and check on the borders of Poland and Ukraine. So that tells you that he's putting pressure from the north as well. And he did a snap inspection of his military and this and that. So I think what you're making is kind of making, if you join the dots within these developments around the place, it kind of forms a picture that they're trying to keep as many as forces to protect Kiev, so that it's easier for the Russians to kind of mop up whatever they need to do. And,
because I can't think of them denuding their capital. Because the Russian forces are still in Belarus. They're still at Kharkiv.
Yeah.
They haven't moved further. Have the Russians moved a bulk of their forces down southward? I don't think they have. So they've kept that there as a force and as a threat and force, waiting to see how this battle here goes. And if they find that they are denuding Kiev, I don't think Russians would waste much more time than to drive further into Kiev, because their idea is to keep the major part of the Ukraine forces from the south.
That is, I think, a point to be underlined, bold, italics, boxed up. It's something that we need to understand, because I think the Russians are also playing a deceiving game, which a lot of people have missed out. And that's the funny part about this.
Because they were looking for holes in a Russian campaign. And from the beginning, when I was analyzing this, the feeling that, I can't understand why he's doing what he's doing, and no one shows the bulk of your forces along the road. I mean, I've been the strike corps commander. There was no question that my bulk of my forces would be on the road. In a near air parity situation.
And we've spoken about this, sir. I'd actually asked you that as a commander of a strike corps, would you like to see your tanks lined up in one single line, or in a 12-mile pattern spread across, zooming in?
Because it's just that the Russians had that many more forces that they could plan this deception on such a large scale.
So, according to the Russian president, when he launched the war, when he launched the special military operation, let me be Russian-wise politically correct when I say this. He had mentioned about demilitarization, denazification, and the freedom in terms of Donbass and Luhansk and Donetsk region with Crimea and all that. We've spoken about that. The demilitarization is a long drawn-out grinding process in terms of an attrition war, putting out Ukraine's ability to fight, to regroup. How far that is possible, we'll come to in probably the next question. But denazification is something that I'd like to talk about. Now, we know in Ukraine, a lot of these groups are there under the banner of the right sector. Azov is one of the most popular ones. And the strength of the Azov was supposed to be around about 2,000 odd men. How are they known as a battalion is besides me. But anyways, the total surrender in Azovstal has been about 2,450, 60, 70 men. And it's, as I said, ongoing. This particular group has been on the radar of the Russians for a long time. They've been termed as a terrorist organization within Russia. Mariupol, was this an additional benefit because the headquarters of the Azov Battalion was also Mariupol, sir?
Yes, that's right.
So how do you see them now moving forward with this whole effort of denazification with the other groups? Because these other groups are all spread across. This was one thing that they kind of hit and finished. What else?
See, as I was speaking, Aadi, one are the political aims.
Sir.
And from the political aims, you derive your military aims. So if President Putin had said that I want to unify the South and the East, Russian-speaking areas of the South and East, then the military command would have done and planned for exactly this battle. That means from the Crimean Peninsula, take the east and south of Ukraine to include all the populated areas of the south and the east, which had maybe 20-30% Russian-speaking people. So I would, translate a political aim into a military. Now, the second political aim, he said, was denazification of Ukraine. In denazification, the most important and the most visible Nazi symbol, because the symbol of the Azov Battalion is actually the symbol of the SS. It's exactly the same. This was the most visible symbol of the far right in Ukraine, and responsible for a large number of war crimes themselves on the Russian-speaking people living in the far right in the east and the south of Ukraine. They've been responsible for, and it's well documented by the Russians.
Yeah.
It's only that no one believes them. And even in the US, in their Senate, in the House of Congress, there have been reservations expressed about supporting the Azov Battalion, because the background of the Azov Battalion and their linkages to the far right have been established, more or less. So the second military aim would have been destruction of the Azov Battalion. So now the third one would have been the denial of the seacoast, which meant the capture of, Odessa, Kherson, Melitopol, Mariupol, Donetsk, Donbass, Luhansk, and the areas, with the denial to the seaport. So these, when you look at a political aim and you derive your military aim, these would have been the derivatives. Ukraine does have a tendency to the far right. Actually, a large number of Ukrainians had supported Hitler's armies. A large number of them had supported. And for years, they've been fighting this kind of battle on both sides. If you take it dispassionately, that there is a large far right movement in Ukraine.
Yeah. Been there for a long time as well, sir.
Yeah. So I can't think of anything more visible than the destruction of the Azov Battalion.
Symbolic.
More visible and symbolic than the destruction of the. I do not think President Putin has any further aims to this. Unless, of course, he now changes those aims. But yesterday, if you just see that, what has he said? He says, I have now opened the Sea of Azov in the Black Sea. I will permit movement of grains from Ukraine, provided you lift the sanctions against me. This is yesterday's statement.
Yes.
So if yesterday's statement is giving out a caveat that you want wheat, the world is going to suffer from huge wheat starvation. Ukraine has 20% of the world's wheat, which is willing to export. I'll allow that shipment. But the crippling sanctions on me should be lifted. The ball goes back to the NATO and their ability to now strike out, some kind of agreement, because Putin has been clear now. There's no other way they can lift the wheat.
Yes, sir. And he's in a position of strength as well.
Yeah, he's completed the demining of the port of Odessa. He completed the demining of the Sea of Azov. So this is all he had planned for. So this is what I think is the political aim vis-a-vis the military aim. And that's why I said, from what I gather, from what I've read, I'm not sure now what President Putin has in mind, other than wanting Zelensky to surrender and request for a ceasefire. Because with yesterday's statement means he's ready for a reconciliation on his terms.
Let's talk about the demilitarization. So that's an interesting one because, the West pumped in about 13 billion of weapons initially, M777s and this and that, and a whole lot of tamasha. The virality of those weapons is a totally different discussion. And I don't want to get into that because there's a huge debate about that. Let's talk about the packages itself. And then President Joe Biden goes ahead and signs a $40 billion package. There are again differences as to how much is actually going down to the ground in Ukraine and this and that. All that separate, sir. Demilitarization would also mean the breaking the will to fight of the Ukrainians so that the Russians are able to get what they want to. Any fighting force would like that. But this advent of $40 billion, $13 billion, this weapon, that weapon, and this and that is going to keep the morale going for the Ukrainians for a little while at least. How do you think the Russians are now planning to beat across this particular narrative? Because we don't hear them saying anything about all this at all.
See, when you talk of the translation of a $40 billion aid package, weapons package, you would firstly be talking of a time frame. Those $40 billion package cannot come in a day. Maybe meant over the next 1 year or 2 years, or maybe more, because nobody has that kind of weapons with them. Will this war last for another year? Is something that, in 3 months he's been able to take almost till the east of the Dnieper River. I'm not certain where it's going to last. And I'm not certain as to how much time will the rest of the world have for Ukraine if they have to go through another winter, cold winter, without Russian gas and without cheaper gas supplies. Will they be able to sustain another year of high inflation? Without the wheat, you could have a problem of hunger. So I'm not certain that time is on their hands, Aadi. There is something called an announcement, and there's something called practically being able to do it. Secondly, the weapons are meant for soldiers to train and fight. Sans any kind of soldiers or boots on ground support for the Ukraine, which is impossible since it's Russia involved. I can't see the Ukrainian army being built up again to deal with that kind of weapon system. So all in all, much of this are empty words, Aadi, to my mind. Much of this are meant for an audience. But the people of Ukraine are pretty clear that they've already lost 1/4 of their country. And a very, very important part of it.
Yeah, the entire industry is gone, sir.
How long will they continue to sustain these kind of damages? How long will Ukrainians continue to be refugees? Is another issue.
Sir, coming to the last part and the last question, which is the fun one for me. The Western powers have been able to kind of win over the world by the information that is being put out in the soft medium, in terms of Twitter, in terms of all the social media platforms. The videos that are coming out of Ukraine are straight going up onto news channels without being verified even. And there have been multiple times where Indian news channels have had to show a blackface because they showed a dogfight so as to about 2 aircraft, which was basically a game. And a lot of them had to, pull back. So the West literally overflooded the entire thing. And today, one of the drawbacks that we see, and we've discussed this when we've talked about gray zone and information warfare in multiple occasions, that the biggest danger of these things is falling into your own trap. The Russians, on the other hand, have been quiet. They have not put out narratives. They have not put out photographs. You can find some stuff on some different channels, which the Russians have, but it's far and few between. It took me about a month before I could find the Russian version of the propaganda being put online. So it's not that easy to find. What do you think their strategy was by just laying off the internet, not responding to every allegation? They kept quiet during Bucha, everything. What is their strategy, sir?
Aadi, when you talk of strategy, you talk of what were the political aims and what they had with them, and to reach what target audience. After all, information warfare can only be successful if you have clearly defined the target audience. So what was Russia's target audience? One was their own domestic population. That was the first and most important target audience for Russia. Second was the population that Russia was planning to invade, the population of those places. The people of Mariupol, people of Donetsk, the people of Donbass, the people of Lugansk, the people on the border of Ukraine where they were planning to reach. That was the second part of the knowledge. Third part was probably the people of Ukraine. Probably. After that, they were looking at the rest of the world. Because anybody planning a war with NATO being an adversary, which it is here, would be very clear that NATO would control all the social media channels because everything had been created in countries of the NATO. I can't think of Russia or China ever competing with the USA as far as social media is concerned. Because the US and NATO countries have over the last 70 odd years built up a narrative which the rest of the world has taken. They have the ability. So you can't touch them on that narrative. There's also the issue of the English language, which is very alien in Russia. So Russians have succeeded as far as their domestic population is concerned. There is no large movement against Putin for this war.
Nothing. It just started and ended.
Right. It started and ended. So that's a place where people have not. So that means the people of Russia are not against Putin or his prosecution of war. So that part he succeeded. The people living in the areas which are now under occupation by Russia, some of them, as I said, 20-30% were Russian-speaking people. Maybe of that 80-90% supported it and the balance did. So there too, this information of the West may have had a very difficult time to reach. The ones who could run away, ran away. They are citizens living as refugees in some other place. So there they will not succumb to any kind of propaganda anywhere else. The rest of the world anyway has taken the Western narrative. So if you look at Putin's aims for social media or to reach his information cycle, he's pretty well done what he wanted to do. You've not been able to reach the Russian people. He cut off all access to everybody else. They have absolutely no idea of any other narrative other than the Russian narrative. And the people remain what they are. So I feel this was his aim because anyone would realize that you can't deal with the Americans on this issue.
Big lesson for the Chinese, sir.
I was thinking of that completely. That can they also do something similar?
Yeah.
Once they start their campaign in Taiwan, and how will they handle their campaign is something the Chinese have to now think of.
Because language is a barrier there.
If they are planning to do what they're planning to do.
Language indeed is a barrier in China as well. You can't reach the Chinese people. The Russians were a little more open than the Chinese people, although, but a huge gap in that particular scenario. Yeah. Sir, thank you so much. I think, loads of doubts in my mind at least have kind of come to a rest, especially this social media part of it. I've been wondering about this. And for me, it was a very simple thing that the Russians just chose to keep quiet and didn't fight a war.
Their target audience was not you guys. So they didn't waste effort into trying reaching their message to you.
Sir.
That's the main thing.
It's a very well thought out strategy, I must say. And I mean, war is hell. There's no question. People die. But at the end of it, whatever said and done, the game that has been played by both the sides, Ukraine has also played some games. And the information narrative that they've been able to build up in many cases has been brilliant. I mean, we still don't know whether they shot off the second ship of the Russians or not. We still don't know how many aircraft they've shot down of the Russians. And the tank losses, of course, are pretty high of the Russians as well. So that is something that a lot of analysts who would be fair in their analysis would also agree to. So it's an interesting learning, if I may say so. And thank you so much for putting across in simple, straight words that I think even a non-military person like me, just as an enthusiast and a student of military affairs, would be able to learn and analyze further. Till next time, sir,
Thank
for
you.
another interesting, in-depth subject on Dev Talks.
Thank you.
Jai Hind, sir.
Thank you.